Okay, continuing on with our WISER series, what I'd like to do now is go into the help identify chemical. So I'm sitting on the home screen here, and you can either click this purple binder where it says help identify chemical, or again, it's up here at the top menu under this button. So we click on help identify chemical. And the first thing I want to point out is if you look over here on the bottom left part of the screen, it has this little colored bar down here. And right now, because we haven't put any information into it, it's telling me that I have a possible 438 chemicals out of 438 chemicals. And so essentially what we're going to do is we're going to feed it some information, and as it sorts through that information from the database, it's going to narrow these chemicals down. Now the list right above the green bar, this is the list of the 438 possible chemicals. So if you go to the top, it's got a start button, or you can skip the start button if you want to do. Well, let me back up. Right here, you've got new search or save search, because it does allow you to save some of the work you've done in here. But we're going to click on new search. And then if you click the start button, actually, it's not doing anything. Usually, it just drops down into these and brings you through all of these menu items. But I'm just going to click on the properties because, like I said, for whatever reason, the start button is just bringing me back to this home screen. So if I go to properties, I've got these buttons over here, and this just allows me to put in some information to start narrowing down the chemical. So we'll click on state. Now, if you look, here are the different states of matter to choose from. And you'll see a number behind each one of those menu items. Well, that is the number of chemicals in that state of matter that is in WISER. So, for example, if I click gas, I just selected only 79 chemicals. And if you look down here at the green bar, it totally dropped that bar down, and it shows me number 79. And then, of course, this list here got a lot smaller. There's only 79 chemicals there, right? So it'll start weeding out information pretty fast. So I chose a gas. If I go to color, we'll say it was like a greenish color. And again, it dropped it down now to 5 chemicals. So we got phosgene, fluorine, chlorine trifluoride, chlorine dioxide, and chlorine. So it's narrowing things down pretty fast, and all I've done is put in a state of matter and a color. It's got clarity, was it clear, was it cloudy or opaque? And if you see, obviously with our gas, the concentration would, if it was not that big of a concentration, it'd be clearer. If it was a heavier concentration, be cloudier, whatever. So the clarity is going to be driven by the concentration. Here we've got odor. We've got taste, in case you tasted the gas. We got pH. So if we've been downrange and actually got a pH on this, we can put that in there. We got specific gravity. Is it floating on water or sinks in water? Well, obviously this is a gas, so if you put that the gas floated on water, it's going to clear the list and say, okay, there's no gases in our database that float on water. And then last, you got vapor density. And so does it rise in air or does it settle in air? So that is the properties button. Excuse me. That was not a COVID cough, by the way. I'm going to leave the properties the way they are, and we'll leave these 5 gases here. But what I want to show you now is the symptoms. So if you remember from the search of the known chemical, I said that WISER uses symptoms as identification tools. And I said you'd see why. Well, now you'll see why. Because as I click on this little guy and determine what kind of signs and symptoms he's having, it's going to use the signs and symptoms, attach that chemical in the database to either include or exclude information on my list. So if I click his brain, it's going to bring up a list of things that can happen to the neurological function. So like dizziness, right? So now, as soon as I click dizziness, because I had a 3 behind there, again, if you look at the lower left corner, it dropped my selection of available gases in the database to 3. If I click on the throat, respiratory or the lung, it's going to give me this list. Nose, mouth, heart, if they're tachy or Brady, it'll be in there. Gastric disturbances. If I click on skin, it's giving me all this skin stuff like pale, itching. The thermometer over here, if you click on that, it's going to give you temperature indicators. I guess that's all one. If you kind of mouse over, you can see the different categories it gives you. So I think I've hit them all. Oh, nope, ears. So did this, did chlorine, create hearing loss? Okay, so that is the sign and symptom page, and it's kind of cool. Like I said, if we had a victim that was caught in the incident, we could evaluate them from a medical standpoint, see what signs and symptoms they have, and plug it into WISER and possibly narrow down our search. If you go to the next button under symptoms, it goes into categories, and nothing shows up. You have actually got to hit this drop-down list. And basically, it's like, okay, do we have miscellaneous category? Do we have DOT hazard classifications? Or do we have WMDs, right? Well, if you knew this was a choking agent, you could click WMD, click on choking agent, and that would narrow it down to just chlorine, right? If you have a DOT hazard class, you click what DOT hazard class that applies, and again, it'll narrow it down. Here, there's not a lot we can do. If we click on toxic gas, it'll get rid of chlorine dioxide. If you click on oxidizing substances as well, it'll drag it down to chlorine trifluoride because it also ships as a division 5.1 where chlorine doesn't. So I'm going to uncheck these just so we get our 3 chemicals back. And then, of course, if you go to miscellaneous categories, it's like, hey, is this a meth lab or is this a chemical weapon precursor? So, we didn't have WISER around during the meth lab days. It would have been kind of nice to use it with some of our meth labs just to help determine our unknowns. The next button over here on the left is the Nfpa 704. And if I click that, it's just going to ask you to put in the Nfpa 704 placard information. And of course, that's going to go into the database and try to match up with the chemical. Problem with Nfpa 704s is if I have multiple chemicals in one building, what it'll do is you take the highest number for each category. And so the placard won't be representative of a bunch of materials, one material, but it's representative of the highest hazard in that area of several materials. So, limited information. Obviously, we'd have to characterize our site really well. And then the last button over here is transportation. And essentially what it does with transportation is it has the ERG guide pages. So if you saw, per se, a class 2 placard that tells you to go to 123, you can click on that. And that got rid of chlorine dioxide, and now just the chlorine and chlorine trifluoride are there. If you happen to, I don't know if I can clear that. No, clear. If you happen to see it in a rail car, it's going to show you the silhouettes for rail cars. It'll show you the silhouettes of the road trailers. So again, this is just pages out of the ERG. I don't really dig the way they did it, but it works. So like I clicked on the DOT 412 and of course it dropped it down to just chlorine dioxide. Now, once you do narrow down the chemical, if you click on that chemical, it's going to bring it up with basically the same view as the search known substances view, where we have our drop down list, we have our reactivity profile that we can run, we have the protective action distance map that we can open up, and here's all our information. So that is the help identify unknown chemical. And the reason this is so important is because this is the only database we use that is actually out there actively searching for data in the database to match up with our inputs to help us identify a chemical. Everything else we have to do it the old school way, you know, and have some sort of idea what the chemical is, go to that chemical, and then for ourselves see if the information matches. So this is quite a bit faster, and I would say this is one of the features that separates WISER from the other chemical databases we use. So in our fourth segment, we're going to go over the Explorer tools, and I think that'll wrap up WISER.